So, what are Android architecture components? Android architecture components are a bunch of libraries that are supposed to help us build more robust and maintainable apps. But what does maintainable means and why you need an architecture? As beginners, we write all of our code into activities and fragments, and for smaller projects that's not really a problem. But when an app gets bigger, this tightly coupled code can turn into a problem, because it gets harder and harder to make changes to it without having a ripple effect on the whole code. And managing the activity and fragments life cycles becomes harder and harder the more stuff we put in there. And architecture components are there to help us build more isolated components where each part of the program has a well-defined responsibility and ideally can be modified or removed without touching any other component. The architecture component that we are going to use is a library called room. And this is the structure of the room. First we have entity. Entity is a class which is annotated with entity that is used to describe a database table when we are working with rooms. So an entity is a table. Next we have DAO. DAO stands for data access objects, which is used for mapping SQL queries to functions. So here we're going to define our queries. Next we have the room database, and the room database is an improved version of SQLite database. It encapsulates all of the the entity and the DAO and creates all the code necessary for creating the database. So you don't need to write SQL statements for creating the database, as you'll see. You just I'm not gonna go into that now, but the room database basically encapsulates the DAO and the entity and creates the database for us. And it's a better version of the SQLite database that we use in the past. Next we have repository, and repository is a class that is mainly used to manage multiple sources of data, as you can see in this diagram. You can have the room, you can have the SQLite database, or you can have the web service as the source of the data. Next we have a view model, and the view model acts as a communication center between repository and the UI. And the UI no longer needs to worry about the origin of the data. The view model instances, and this is very important, survive configuration changes. So the activity and the fragment, if there is a configuration change like rotating the screen, the data is going to be preserved, and this is very important. Next we have LiveData, and LiveData is a data holder class that can be observed. It can be observed by some observer, which can be the fragment or the activity. It holds as well as catches the latest version of the data and notifies our observer, which can be the activity or the fragment, whenever the data is being updated. And in turn, the data which is being displayed is changed immediately by the observer. And LiveData automatically manages all of this since it's aware of the relevant lifecycle status changes while observing. So it's lifecycle aware of the life cycles of our observer. So these are the components, and the big takeaway from all of this is that what we are having now, it's a structure, and we have modularization. This is a word which is hard to say. And basically we have a structure where we have components separated which interact with each other and don't have all the code tightly up in the same place like we have in the past into an activity or into a fragment. Now we have a structure. Now we have a way of separating our code, a way of putting our queries and all the data that we're going to get into a separate container. And then we have repository, we have the view model, which holds our data and forwards the data to the activity or the fragment, and the data is wrapped into this live data, which basically observes the data in the database, and whenever there is a change, it will bubble up the change to the activity, and the activity or the fragment, it will update the data which is shown on the screen. And very important, this structure that we have now, it's survive configuration changes. So if you rotate the screen or if you leave the app and you come back 5 hours after, the data is going to be preserved. And previously the data would not, in order to preserve the data previously, you have to use the save instance state to get all the variables before, and we have to manage all of that in the correct life cycle of the functions. So you need to call functions, and you don't need to do any of this now, because now you have modularization. So the data is separated in containers, and is separated in each and each has a well-defined responsibility, and it knows what to do, and each component knows only about the component below of it. So this is the introduction into Room database, and see you in the next video.